The most important lesson I learned about teaching online is to remain flexible, which does not come naturally for me. I have a plan. And when I have the plan and it's well developed and I have figured out all the things, it is not my natural inclination to want to deviate from it. And so I've learned that it is essential for me to be receptive to feedback, particularly from my students. And in receiving that feedback, being flexible enough to make changes to the course content, to its delivery, whatever it is that they need.
You know, when I would prepare courses that would teach face-to-face, of course I would think about them, months in advance. Absolutely. But I don't think there was always a part of me that knew I'm going to probably have to adjust and change some things. And, week 8 seems really far away. But in online teaching, I don't have that luxury. My classes have to be uploaded, before the semester starts. And so I have found that that was a lesson I had to learn, to really think more strategically around what I'm doing in the classroom. And I really appreciate that, because again, not that I didn't want to do that in face-to-face teaching, but in my experience, and because I'm pretty good with being an ad hoc thinker, I could do that in a face-to-face classroom. I could do that, on my feet, so to speak. And so I could rely on that a lot. And I can't rely on that in an online classroom. And that's a good thing, because I think I know my teaching has improved because I now have to spend more time preparing and making sure everything kind of vibes and fits together like a good puzzle piece.
What I found to be extremely helpful is a very consistent, clearly organized, this week, pictures for each week, a similar structure every week of like, this is what we're going to do. This is what's required. A welcome video from me repeating essentially that. So it's sort of, you got the text version of this is what's happening this week. You've got my video version of this is what's happening this week. And then you've got the content of like, here's a recorded lecture, here's a TED Talk or a film or something. Here's an application exercise I want you to prep before we meet in person. So the same thing. And by like week 3 or 4, students are like, okay, I understand what I'm supposed to do, what I have to do every week, what the structure and schedule is like every week.
I only release them their material 1 week at a time, except at the end when they need the information about the final, and so I just pace it through. And I would say that has been my greatest learning. And even though the students might in the beginning, they'll tell you they want more, like they want to know, like, what to do, but they can't. And they can't do a midterm in the first week. You have to just give it to them and then tell them what you're giving them and kind of why, and give your rationale.
I felt like trial and error sometimes is the best teacher, and mostly that would happen because I tried to keep an open line with students as well as my co-faculty to see how they're doing, because we're all in the same boat. So feedback I got from students, and then also feedback from other faculty around the school. Best way to learn.
Early on, I have trouble with authority, that they just see me as, oh, she's so nice. We love Dr. Chang. She's so sweet. But for them to learn, for students to learn, they had to trust your authority. So for me, I had to generate that feel in the room. And for some faculties, they come in and they look like authority figure. They are tall, they have a deep voice, then they had to create warmth and empathy. So I think you just, as you do this, you learn, you figure it out. And so for me, I think for most people that they had to know, like, oh, I'm in the hands of somebody who really knows what they are doing and really good at this and really care.
I think another thing I've learned is something that I already knew, but maybe didn't use enough of, but the sort of scaffolding approach to helping students grasp concepts and apply concepts to practical papers and exercises, et cetera. And so I found that the structuring of the online course and tying the lecture very closely with a part of their assignment, et cetera, and sort of walking them through really improved actually the quality of the papers I received on one of the assignments. I'm gonna I'm going to work on scaffolding a little more with other assignments in the class for future years. But I think that scaffolding was a big sort of learning for me, as well as the time. And I think also the combination, the value of the combination of synchronous and asynchronous. And so whether that would be in-person, a hybrid course that was part in-person and part asynchronous, but in this environment, it was having the synchronous and asynchronous combination that I found was critical to my engagement with students, their enjoyment of the course, my enjoyment of the course, and their learning. I really found pairing those was necessary for me.
So ordinarily for me, when I'm in a classroom, I don't do lecture style teaching. It's all interactive learning for me, practicing good adult learning theory. And so I would say something, I thought it was sort of funny, or I thought it was pithy, or I thought it was compelling, and there was nothing. And what I discovered was that almost all of the students had their microphones muted. And I don't know if that was a norm that they learned prior to this, or they thought that that was the way they should do it in my class. I wasn't quite sure where that came from, but what occurred to me is that we lost spontaneity, that the mere sort of like chuckle, the sigh, the grimace of the face was all sort of lost, all sort of those minor verbal cues and many of the nonverbal cues, because when somebody's only this big on your screen, you have 25 students, you can't see a whole bunch of the nonverbal cues. So there wasn't a lot of give and take in the communication. So I then started asking and encouraging the students to keep their mics unmuted so that I would pick up some of that. But also, if you're not the most extroverted person in the room, reaching to the mouse to unmute, to then say something into a space, but now the conversation has already passed, is a very difficult thing for lots of folks, because now you have to interrupt the flow of whatever was there. So when we unmuted, it became a much more spontaneous and open conversation. And for me, significantly more interesting to be able to then pick up on that stuff. And I think from a student's point of view, helpful for them as well, because they increase their participation.
Students pick up any attitudes from their faculties. They are very sensitive. So they feel judged, they feel unsupported with the slightest. Even if you think you're neutral, they will pick up negativity. So I think you cannot err by going more positive, because most of it's going to be lost and diluted.
I'll just share an experience that happened this semester, is that our junior students took an exam and they hadn't done very well, like, as a class. And it wasn't my exam, it was another class. And there's something I could pick up even in clinic when I saw these students in the dental clinic, is that there's this like, I don't really trust what you're telling me, because that sort of got failed on another class, or that's the sense I got. So I saw that as a learning opportunity, because I'm like, no, really, like I list out learning objectives. I list out, I'm going to test you on these concepts. And I'm not going to tell you the question, but I'm going to test you on the concepts. But it was important to send out a class email just to say, I want to reinforce this. This is where it's coming from. In previous years, I had worked with students to do like, if they had some questions on certain concepts and areas, but I made a point to do a review session, like a larger review session, more than I normally would do, just to say, hey, here's some exposure to me if you're willing to see it, but also that I really mean what I say.
I approach it in an online setting differently than I would in an in-person setting, just because I don't get to see them necessarily synchronously. I teach asynchronously predominantly. And so it really has a lot to do with, I found, with being really well prepared beforehand, even before the class starts, and then being flexible as the class goes on, because each cohort I found might have different needs, and I might have to adjust some of my, not so much the objectives, but some of the ways that I ask for my students to perform or to show me how they've mastered the objectives.
I had been conducting my synchronous learning sessions using one video conferencing platform, and I really liked it. I had my setup. It made me happy. And then I heard rumblings from my students that they did not love the platform as much as I did. So although I loved it and I thought it worked really well for me, mid-semester, I switched to a new video conferencing platform and had to go through take the weekend in between our classes to learn and get comfortable with it, so that when we moved into it, I felt confident. They were obviously already super comfortable with it and happy, but that I would also be that way. And I found that in being amenable to making that change midstream, it made the students so much happier. They were immediately more engaged and communicative because they were in an environment that made them feel more comfortable.
I don't say that this is how I'm going to evaluate you. I tell them, this is how I want to train your smart brain to be the brain of a scientist. You're a smart person, but I had to make you into a smart scientist. So I tell them ahead of time what I'm trying to do, and that the graduate school is by nature stressful. It's not personal. Nobel Prize winners will totally stress out and feel they're out of their depth when they are first year graduate students. So just so you normalize everything that is causing them stress. And then and they show them you're willing and you're ready to help them through the process. I think they had to see that you're ally, that you can read their mind to a certain extent because you care and you've been listening.
I also had to learn that engagement doesn't always look the way I think it should look like. So I don't think it's frequency as much as quality and thoughtfulness behind, how we interact with students.